I still remember the day I nervously brought it up to my wife. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, and my hands were shaking slightly as I fumbled with the words. What if I got breast implants? I said, almost whispering, as if saying it out loud made it too real. Her reaction surprised me. She didn't laugh. She didn't scoff. She just stared at me, her eyes widening slightly, and then, with a small, almost mischievous smile, she said, "Why not?" I froze. I had expected hesitation, maybe concern, maybe even a little judgment. But yes, that single word carried a weight I wasn't prepared for. My mind started racing, images, fears, and excitement all tangled together. The idea of finally exploring this part of myself, something I'd been hesitant to admit even to myself, suddenly felt possible. And it wasn't just about the physical change. It was about stepping into a version of me that had been tucked away for years, hidden beneath layers of doubt and embarrassment. We spent the next hour talking about it, sizes, expectations, recovery. But beneath all the logistics, there was a deeper, unspoken question lingering in the air. Who would I be when this change was complete? That night, as I lay in bed beside her, I couldn't sleep. I imagined the possibilities. The way I might look, the way I might feel, the way she might see me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about implants. This was the doorway into something I had only dared to dream about in secret. The next few days were a blur of research, consultations, and planning. Each step brought me closer to the reality of transformation, and yet a creeping nervousness gnawed at me. I kept imagining the moment I would see myself in the mirror after surgery. Would I recognize me? Would I feel at peace? Or would the change feel surreal, almost alien? My wife, noticing my anxiety, would hold my hand and whisper reassurances. Her confidence in me gave me courage, but it also added a layer of suspense that made my heart race every time I thought about the procedure. Finally, the day arrived. Sitting in the surgeon's office, I felt my stomach twist into knots. The nurse explained everything in meticulous detail, but my mind kept drifting to what would happen afterward, how I would move, how I would feel, and most importantly, how she would react when she saw me for the first time. When the anesthesiologist came over, I caught her eye and smiled nervously, and she squeezed my hand, whispering, "It's going to be perfect." And with that, I drifted into a haze of sedation, unsure if I was stepping toward a new reality or diving into an unfamiliar world. Hours later, I woke to a strange heaviness on my chest and a tingling, unfamiliar sensation in my body. My wife was there, smiling down at me, eyes sparkling with excitement and something else, anticipation, maybe pride, maybe amusement. I lifted my hand to my chest and felt the smooth contours, the fullness that now defined my silhouette. The first wave of emotions hit me: shock, awe, curiosity, and a flutter of happiness I hadn't expected. But beneath it all, a whisper of doubt lingered. Who was I now? And how much of me had changed already, simply by stepping into this new physical form? The first days after the surgery were strange, disorienting, and yet quietly exhilarating. Every movement reminded me that something fundamental had shifted. Even getting out of bed felt different. My body carried a new weight, and with it a new sense of presence I had never experienced before. My wife hovered nearby, carefully helping me with everything, and there was a mixture of tenderness and amusement in her eyes. Sometimes I could swear she was measuring how far I had already begun to change, not just physically, but in the way I carried myself. The mirror became my new obsession. I would catch glimpses of myself and freeze, trying to reconcile the reflection with the person I thought I was. At first, it felt like a stranger staring back, soft, rounded curves that I had only imagined in private moments. But gradually, I began to notice small things. The way my shoulders sloped differently, the subtle shift in posture, the way clothing hung in ways it never had before. Every glance brought a mix of wonder and unease. I wanted to embrace this version of me, yet part of me feared I might be losing the person I had known all my life. One afternoon, my wife suggested something unexpected. "Why don't we try a little experiment?" she said, her voice light, almost playful. "Let's see how you'd look as my sister." I laughed nervously at first, thinking it was a joke, but the look in her eyes told me she was serious. She had always been supportive, but this felt like a test, a challenge to explore the boundaries of identity in a way I hadn't considered. We spent hours together, experimenting with hairstyles, makeup, and clothing. She guided me gently, coaxing out features I had never noticed: the shape of my face, the curve of my jaw, the subtle softness in my hands. By the time we were done, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back from the mirror was both familiar and entirely new, and for a fleeting moment, I felt an odd mix of empowerment and vulnerability. My wife laughed softly, the sound warm and encouraging. "See? You could totally be my sister," she teased, and there was no malice in her tone, only excitement and curiosity. That night, as I lay in bed, the image of myself lingered in my mind. I realized that the transformation wasn't just about implants, makeup, or clothes. It was about perspective. I had always thought of myself in rigid terms, bound by expectation and self-imposed limits. But now, seeing myself through a different lens, I began to understand how fluid identity could be, how much freedom there was in simply exploring possibilities without judgment. Yet, even with that sense of liberation, there was an undercurrent of tension. I wondered how far I could go, how much I could explore before the line between reality and experiment blurred. The next morning, I hesitated to step out of the bedroom, anxious about the world seeing me differently, wondering if they could perceive the change as easily as I did. And then my wife, sensing my hesitation, leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry. We're just starting." Her words, though simple, carried a promise that this journey was only beginning, and that my transformation, both inside and out, was far from over. The days that followed became a delicate dance between discovery and self-consciousness. Each morning, I woke with a strange anticipation, half eager, half anxious, about the person I would see in the mirror. My wife had become my mirror guide, helping me navigate the subtle nuances of appearance, how to contour my cheeks, how different hairstyles could soften or sharpen my face, even how certain fabrics seemed to hug my new form in ways that were both surprising and oddly comforting. One afternoon, she suggested we go out for a short walk in the neighborhood. "Just a little test," she said with that same playful sparkle in her eyes. I hesitated. The idea of leaving the house in this new form was terrifying. What if people stared? What if I felt exposed, vulnerable? She took my hand and squeezed it, her calm confidence spilling into me. "Trust me," she whispered, "you'll be surprised how natural it can feel." Stepping outside was a revelation. The sun caught the curve of my shoulders, the bounce of my hair, and for the first time, I felt a strange harmony between the way I looked and the way I felt inside. People passed us on the sidewalk, seemingly oblivious, and yet my chest tightened with a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. I realized that part of the transformation wasn't just physical. It was learning to inhabit space differently, to move with a subtle elegance I had never allowed myself before. My wife laughed softly at my tense posture and whispered, "Relax, you're already amazing at this." That night, she suggested we document the change. We set up a camera and began taking photos, experimenting with different angles and expressions. Seeing the images on the screen was surreal. Each shot revealed a version of me I had never acknowledged, a reflection that was undeniably feminine, but still uniquely me. And with each click of the shutter, a strange thrill coursed through me, half pride, half disbelief. I began to understand that this journey wasn't just about altering appearance. It was about discovering layers of myself that had always existed, quietly waiting for the chance to be seen. But with excitement came tension. I noticed small pangs of doubt creeping in late at night. Would people outside of our home understand this? Could I balance this new identity with my old life? What would happen if someone recognized me, if someone I knew saw the changes too soon? These thoughts pressed heavily on me, a reminder that transformation was never just skin deep. Then one evening, my wife said something that shook me. "I think you could even pass as my sister in public," she said, almost casually. I laughed nervously, unsure if she was joking. But when I looked at her, I realized she meant it. It wasn't just about appearances, it was about how convincingly I could inhabit this new identity. And the idea, terrifying and thrilling at once, began to take root. I realized I was standing at a crossroads. Keep this as a private exploration or step fully into the persona I had created and see how far it could go. The choice, I understood, would change everything. The next morning, I woke with a sense of anticipation that felt heavier than excitement. It was responsibility, in a way I hadn't expected. My wife had hinted at taking the experiment further, suggesting we try going to a public place together, fully embracing this new identity. I hesitated, staring at the mirror and studying the reflection that now seemed almost like a twin of her rather than me. My chest rose and fell rapidly as the reality sank in. Today, I would step outside not just as me, but as her sister. We spent the morning preparing. She helped me pick an outfit that was casual but feminine, something that would make the transformation look natural rather than forced. Hair curled softly around my shoulders, subtle makeup accentuating my features, and the new contours of my body adding to the effect. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. Yet somehow, I also felt a surge of confidence I had never known. The person looking back at me wasn't just a reflection. She was a possibility, a new chapter, a version of myself waiting for acknowledgement. Stepping out the door, hand in hand with my wife, I felt the first ripple of fear. People passed on the sidewalk, some glancing in our direction. My heart hammered against my chest, and I realized how strange it felt to exist as someone both familiar and entirely foreign to the world. My wife smiled and whispered, "You're doing fine. Just breathe." Her reassurance grounded me, yet it also made the tension more acute. I wasn't just exploring this transformation alone. Someone else was watching, supporting, and, in a way, judging. As we entered a nearby cafe, I felt a sudden surge of awareness. Each movement of my hands, each tilt of my head, every subtle shift in posture felt amplified. I caught sight of my reflection in the glass door and froze. The person I had imagined in private moments was now real, tangible, and alive in a way that made my chest tighten. My wife leaned in, gently adjusting my collar, whispering, "You look incredible." Her words were a balm, but they also forced me to confront the intensity of this experience. This wasn't just about appearances anymore. It was about living a reality that I had only dared to dream about. The more time I spent in public, the more I noticed subtle reactions. Strangers smiled, barely noticing. Some glanced with curiosity. Others seemed to sense something familiar. I realized that the transformation wasn't just about how I looked. It was about how I carried myself, how I allowed my body and presence to convey confidence, femininity, and authenticity. By the time we left the cafe, I felt exhausted yet exhilarated, as if I had crossed an invisible threshold. Back home, we sat together in silence for a while. My wife's gaze was soft, contemplative, almost proud. "You are amazing out there," she said quietly. I smiled, but underneath, a mix of relief and disbelief churned. I realized that this journey was not simply about cosmetic changes. It was about courage, exploration, and self-discovery. And even as I settled into the night, I couldn't shake a quiet thought. If I could inhabit this version of myself so convincingly today, what else could I dare to explore tomorrow? The days after that first public outing felt like walking a tightrope. At home, I moved freely in this new identity, experimenting with different outfits, hairstyles, and makeup techniques, and each small change felt like uncovering another hidden layer of myself. Yet outside, even simple interactions, a quick run to the store, a casual greeting to a neighbor, felt charged with tension. Every glance from a stranger seemed amplified, every smile or sideways glance carrying weight I wasn't sure I could interpret. I realized that living in this transformation wasn't just about how I looked, it was about how I felt in my own skin when the world was watching. One evening, my wife proposed something daring. "Let's go to a small gathering tonight," she said. "Just a few friends." I think it's time you see how it feels in a more social setting. My stomach churned. The thought of being around people who knew me, even in casual contexts, while presenting as someone different, was terrifying. Yet beneath the fear was a flicker of excitement, a sense that I was on the edge of discovering just how far this transformation could reach. We spent hours preparing. My outfit was carefully chosen to blend elegance with comfort, my hair styled in loose waves that framed my face, and makeup applied meticulously. Each brushstroke felt like a step deeper into this new reality, and yet, as I looked in the mirror, a whisper of doubt lingered. Who was I really, behind the layers of appearance? My wife sensed my hesitation and leaned in, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. "You are amazing," she said softly. "And tonight, everyone will see it too." Arriving at the gathering, I was flooded with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Friends greeted us warmly, some with puzzled glances, others with obvious curiosity. I noticed the way my presence shifted in the room, the subtle elegance in the way I carried myself, the way people unconsciously adjusted to my new energy. Each interaction felt like a test, a delicate balance between recognition and reinvention. And with each smile, each conversation, I began to feel a quiet confidence growing inside me. Yet the night wasn't without its moments of tension. A friend leaned in closer than expected, scrutinizing my features, and for a fleeting moment, I panicked. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the illusion might shatter under scrutiny. But my wife's hand found mine, grounding me, reminding me that this wasn't a performance, it was an exploration of myself. And slowly, the fear melted into exhilaration. I realized that the transformation wasn't about tricking anyone. It was about discovering the freedom to exist in a form that felt authentic and alive. By the time we left the gathering, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The world outside seemed different now, as if seeing myself through the eyes of others had reshaped the way I saw reality itself. Sitting in the quiet of our car, my wife reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did beautifully," she said. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. The journey of transformation wasn't just physical or even social, it was deeply, irrevocably emotional. It was a journey into courage, identity, and the boundless possibilities of being seen. The following week, a new sensation settled in, a curious blend of anticipation and unease. After the small gathering, I began to notice subtle shifts in how I perceived myself. It wasn't just the reflection in the mirror or the way clothes fit differently now. It was the way I carried my body, the tilt of my shoulders, the curve of my hips, the softness in my gestures. Each detail felt magnified, almost alive, and I realized that this transformation was seeping into the way I experienced the world. My wife noticed it too. One morning, as I tried on a new outfit she had picked, she stepped back and studied me silently for a moment. "You know," she said slowly, a smile curling on her lips, "you're starting to look more like my sister than me." I laughed nervously, the words hitting me in an unexpected way. There was humor, yes, but also a strange undertone of truth. The changes weren't just superficial. They were creating a parallel version of myself, one that existed fully and independently, yet still tethered to the life I had known. I began spending more time experimenting with this version of me, alone and with her. Makeup became a ritual, clothing a form of expression, and even the simplest tasks, walking into a store, ordering a coffee, felt like rehearsals for inhabiting this identity fully. And yet, every step brought a surge of tension. What if this version of me became more real than the person I had been? What if I started to prefer this reflection over my old life? These thoughts whispered in quiet corners of my mind, and I realized that transformation was never purely joyful. It carried its own set of dilemmas and fears. One afternoon, my wife proposed something that sent my heart into overdrive. "Let's go shopping together," she said, as sisters. The idea thrilled me, yet terrified me at the same time. It wasn't just about public appearance anymore. It was about claiming a presence, stepping into a new role, and doing so confidently. Preparing for this outing took hours. Every detail mattered: the The shoes, the hairstyle, even the subtle choices in jewelry. By the time we were ready, I barely recognized the reflection staring back at me in the mirror. And for the first time, I felt the exhilarating, terrifying possibility I could actually be someone else in the eyes of the world. Walking through the mall, hand in hand with her, was surreal. Strangers passed us, some giving polite glances, others completely unaware, and I felt the odd thrill of anonymity paired with visibility. Every step was a test of confidence, every gesture a rehearsal for inhabiting this persona fully. I noticed the subtle ways people treated me differently. Small courtesies, smiles, fleeting recognition of femininity, and with each interaction, my heart raced. I realized that transformation wasn't just about what others saw. It was about the courage to exist in a form that felt alive, authentic, and unexpectedly powerful. By the time we returned home, exhaustion had set in, but so had a profound sense of accomplishment. Sitting on the couch, my wife looked at me with pride and affection. "You're really embracing this," she said softly. And in that moment, I understood that this journey, this ongoing experiment, was no longer just about curiosity or cosmetic change. It was about courage, identity, and the thrilling, sometimes frightening freedom to explore the limitless dimensions of self. After that day at the mall, a subtle shift took root within me. I began noticing the little details in my reflection that I hadn't before. The curve of my collarbone, the way my hair framed my face, even the way my chest moved as I walked. It was as if every small feature had been amplified, each one telling me a quiet story about the possibilities of who I could be. My wife noticed too, often pausing mid-conversation to glance at me with a soft, almost reverent smile. "You're evolving," she said one evening, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "And it's beautiful." Her words were comforting, but they also stirred something deeper, a quiet anxiety I couldn't ignore. What did it mean to evolve in this way? Could I ever fully reconcile this new version of myself with the person I had been? And yet, each time I tried to imagine going back, it felt impossible. The transformation wasn't just physical anymore. It had seeped into my posture, my gestures, the rhythm of my movements. I was becoming someone new, someone layered, someone both familiar and foreign. One night, after we finished experimenting with makeup and hairstyles, my wife suggested a challenge. "Let's do a full role-play day tomorrow," she said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "From morning till night, you'll be my sister entirely. Clothes, makeup, voice, mannerisms, the works." My heart raced at the thought. The idea of living fully as this persona, even just for a day, was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. It felt like stepping off a cliff and hoping that the person I would become mid-fall could truly soar. The next morning, the preparation felt almost ritualistic. Every detail mattered, softening my voice, perfecting my walk, even the way I smiled at reflections in shop windows. My wife watched me with a mixture of amusement and pride, guiding me gently, but letting me explore on my own. Stepping out into the world in full transformation, I felt a rush of adrenaline that almost made me dizzy. Every glance, every interaction, carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. People were polite, curious, unaware, and with each step, my confidence grew, slowly erasing the initial tremor of fear that had gripped me in the morning. By mid-afternoon, something unexpected happened. A friend of my wife's approached us, chatting warmly, oblivious to the fact that I wasn't the person they expected. The realization struck me suddenly. I could convincingly exist in this identity, not as a disguise, but as a fully realized persona. The thrill was intoxicating, and a quiet wave of power surged through me. I felt seen, not as someone hiding, but as someone fully present, fully alive. And in that moment, I understood that transformation was no longer just about the body. It was about identity, perception, and the courage to inhabit a space that was entirely my own. That evening, back home, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but exhilarated. My wife sat beside me, brushing her fingers lightly over my arm. "You did wonderfully," she whispered. And as I sank into the comfort of her presence, I realized that the journey wasn't just about curiosity or cosmetic change. It was about discovery, acceptance, and the thrill of embracing a version of myself that had always existed, waiting quietly for the chance to be seen. The days that followed carried a subtle intensity one hadn't anticipated. Now that I had experienced the thrill of fully stepping into this new identity in public, returning to my old routines felt strangely awkward. Even simple things like cooking breakfast or walking around the house seemed to carry a new weight. I noticed myself moving differently, speaking with a softer cadence, carrying my body with a subtle elegance that felt natural and exhilarating all at once. It was as if the transformation had seeped beyond the surface, reshaping not just my appearance, but the very way I existed in the world. One evening, my wife suggested another experiment. "Why don't we do a full photo shoot?" she said, her eyes gleaming. "Just us, exploring this version of you." The thought made my heart pound. Being photographed was different than casual selfies or mirror glances. It was being captured, frozen in a form that was both deliberate and permanent. I agreed, though a flicker of nerves lingered. We spent hours arranging clothes, lighting, and poses. Every movement was deliberate, every expression carefully considered. My wife guided me gently, teaching me to tilt my head, soften my gaze, adjust the curve of my hands. As the camera clicked, I began to feel a strange duality, an awareness that I was being seen and celebrated, yet also a vulnerability, as if these images were exposing a part of myself I had never shared before. By the end of the session, I felt drained yet exhilarated, amazed at how convincingly this version of me could exist outside the private confines of our home. But the excitement came with its own tension. Late that night, I caught myself staring into the mirror, studying the contours of my body, the softness of my expression, and a quiet, unsettling question arose. How much of me had changed, and how much of this transformation would feel permanent? I realized that identity wasn't just about appearances. It was about how deeply the world accepted and recognized me, and how much I accepted and recognized myself. The mirror reflected a person I had only begun to understand, someone vibrant, alive, and distinctly new, yet inextricably connected to the life I had known. A few days later, my wife and I planned an evening stroll through the city. Lights glittered in shop windows, people moved past in a blur, and I felt the thrill of walking among them as someone completely transformed. Every interaction, every glance, seemed to reinforce the reality that I could convincingly live as this new persona, that the transformation wasn't just cosmetic, it had become a full-fledged identity. And yet, beneath the thrill, a quiet fear lingered. Would I ever be able to reconcile this version of myself with the world I had left behind? Or would this persona grow so vivid that the old me felt like a distant memory? By the time we returned home, the exhilaration had softened into reflection. My wife looked at me with a warmth and pride that made my chest tighten. "You're really blossoming," she said softly. And as I sank into the couch beside her, I realized that transformation wasn't just about curiosity or experimentation. It was about courage, discovery, and the ever-evolving journey of identity, a journey that had only just begun. The following week brought a mixture of excitement and an unexpected tension that I hadn't anticipated. I began noticing the subtle ways this transformation had changed my daily life, not just how I moved or spoke, but the way I felt when I was alone, and how I imagined the world might perceive me. Even mundane activities like making coffee or reading in the living room carried an undercurrent of awareness, a consciousness of how this new self was beginning to feel permanent in ways I hadn't expected. One afternoon, my wife suggested something audacious. "Let's go to a small, casual event tonight," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Just a few people from our circle. You'll be my sister, fully." My stomach knotted instantly. It wasn't fear of the event itself, but the idea of inhabiting this identity with people who might know me, even faintly. And yet, there was an undeniable thrill. The chance to step into this persona fully, in a social setting, made my heart race in a way I hadn't experienced before. We prepared meticulously. Every detail mattered. Clothing that complemented my new curves, makeup that emphasized softness in my features, hair styled just right to frame my face. My wife's attention to detail was unwavering, and her encouragement helped settle the jittering nerves in my chest. By the time we left, I felt both apprehensive and strangely exhilarated, a cocktail of emotions that mirrored the complexity of this entire journey. At the event, the first few moments were tense. Familiar faces looked at me with polite curiosity, and I could sense subtle shifts in their perception. But as I moved through conversations, laughed at jokes, and gestured naturally, I began to notice something remarkable. The persona I had created wasn't a disguise. It wasn't an act. It was a genuine, believable version of me, soft, confident, alive, and people responded to it as naturally as they did to anyone else. Every interaction reinforced the reality that this transformation wasn't superficial, it was real, and it had a power of its own. After we returned home, the intensity of the evening left me contemplative. Sitting on the couch beside my wife, I traced the edges of my reflection in her eyes, and I realized something profound. The journey wasn't just about cosmetic changes, crossdressing, or public appearances. It was about embracing an identity that had always existed quietly, tucked beneath the surface. It was about courage, authenticity, and the sometimes terrifying, sometimes exhilarating freedom to explore the limits of who I could be. And in that quiet moment, I felt an understanding settle within me. This transformation, in all its layers, was not a chapter. It was the beginning of an entirely new story, one I had the courage to live fully. The transformation had become more than just a series of experiments. It had woven itself into the fabric of my everyday life. Each morning, I woke with a new awareness, a sense that the reflection in the mirror was not merely a curiosity, but a vital part of who I was. My movements were softer, my gestures more fluid, and even my thoughts seemed to dance between the person I had been and the version of me I had discovered. It was exhilarating, humbling, and occasionally disorienting. My wife and I began to talk more openly about the journey, reflecting on how far I had come and imagining where it might lead. "You've grown so much," she said one night, her fingers lightly brushing mine. "Not just in appearance, but in confidence, in presence, in everything." Her words struck me deeply. I realized that this transformation had not only reshaped my body and appearance, but also the way I experienced the world, the way I moved through space, and even the way I understood myself. There were moments of quiet wonder, like catching my reflection in a shop window and marveling at the person I had become, and moments of tension when the lines between old me and new me blurred. But through it all, one thing remained clear. This journey was not about losing myself. It was about discovering parts of me that had always been there, waiting for acceptance. I began to understand that identity isn't fixed. It's fluid, layered, and shaped by both internal recognition and external perception. In those months of transformation, my wife and I experimented, laughed, and explored together. We discovered that the journey wasn't about imitation or disguise. It was about authenticity in a form I had never fully embraced. Every outfit, every hairstyle, every experiment in makeup wasn't just a superficial exercise. It was a conversation with myself, a step toward freedom and understanding. And through it all, she remained my anchor, supporting me, encouraging me, and seeing me as both a partner and a sister in this new reality. The most profound moment came quietly, late one evening. I caught my reflection in the mirror, fully dressed and styled, and for the first time, I didn't see a transformation or an experiment. I saw a person whole, confident, and fully alive, a person I had always longed to become. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. The journey had begun as a question, a tentative exploration. But now I realized it had become my life, my identity, and my choice. I wasn't just wearing someone else's reflection, I was embracing the version of myself I had been waiting for all along. Sitting beside my wife, I smiled softly, feeling a warmth that went beyond physical touch. "Thank you," I whispered, though words seemed too small for the depth of what I felt. She smiled back, her eyes reflecting pride, love, and quiet amusement. And in that moment, I understood something essential. Transformation isn't just about appearances. It's about courage, trust, exploration, and the power to become fully, unapologetically yourself, even if that self surprises everyone, including you. And so, as I finally settled into bed that night, my reflection in the mirror lingering in my mind, I felt complete, not because the journey was over, but because I had finally accepted that who I am is not bound by expectation, but by the freedom to discover, explore, and live fully in every version of myself. The journey had begun with a simple yes, and now it had blossomed into a life I could embrace entirely. And for the first time, I knew that no matter what came next, I would face it as my true self, confident, alive, and unapologetically me.